So I've just come back from a day-long men's work retreat through a charity called the Island of Man. I drove down and we got ferried across to an island and was treated to a day of men's work, discussion, meditation, connection, men helping men. It was beautiful. And I wanted to share a couple of key takeaways. The first one is that men are struggling. We are struggling with feelings of loneliness, with feelings of adequacy, with feelings of purpose. And that was the topic or the content of the session. It's like exploring, expanding, embracing your purpose. And I wanted to share two things. The main thing that I want to talk about is, vulnerability, actually. But before I get to that, the topic of the session that we went through was purpose. And the first question that was asked really made something click into my mind. And this sort of resonance happened. It was incredible. The question was something along the lines of, what would you need to do to live your purpose? Or what's in your way of living your purpose? And closed my eyes, took the breath, and I realized that I am living my purpose. I'm there. And that sort of surprised me because for a long, long time, I feel like I've been devoid of purpose. I feel like I've been searching. I feel I've been surviving, been running. But in that moment, I realized, no, actually, I'm living it. I'm in my sense of self. I sort of reflected on the idea of purpose and, some people were talking about the idea of goals or attainment or all of this sort of stuff. But for me, the idea of purpose was, the journey over the destination, was living in resonance, in harmony with the self, that my actions were aligned with my inner sense of self, which is the purpose, to stay in alignment. There was something there. So I'm like, oh, I'm already there. This is amazing. So then it becomes an idea of how do I stay in purpose? How do I maintain what I'm doing? How can I stay, on the path, so to speak? And the answer was to continue to remind myself of purpose, of the sense of self, to continue with my December self-care challenge, staying sane this festive season, giving myself the gift of silence. And as an aside note, if you would like to do a challenge to stay sane this festive season, I encourage you to click through the link in the show notes to the Art of Self-Connection community and join in. We are doing a self-care challenge this December. But I just need to remind myself, I need to just keep checking back in. But it was really beautiful. I'm like, wow, I'm there. And there was this resonance. Oof, that was cool. But then came the choice of workshops. We could choose to do a few different workshops, but they weren't running repeatedly. You chose one at the expense of not getting the other ones. And the first offerings were a deep, intensive looking into the sense of the self and the soul. Another one was, deep awakening breath work, going deep into the self. Deep work. Painful work. But, beautiful. And then the offering came for doing improv. Each facilitator got a couple of minutes to sort of say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And it was really cool. The guy came up, he's a psychologist, and he's like, we're not going to be doing the deep work. We're just going to be having fun. We're just going to be playing. We're just going to be doing some improv. And I just felt this heart space pull to work with this process. So I did it. And very quickly I was laughing. I was enjoying myself. I was getting silly. And then I realized, I'm like, oh, I see why I need to do this. I need to do this because I'm not embracing the vulnerability of the positive, the vulnerability of play, the vulnerability of expression, the vulnerability of the upside. As you know, if you've been following me for quite some time, if you've read my work, I'm very okay with sharing the darkness. It's like, hey, here's the shadow, here's the depths, here's the pain, here's my trauma. I'm okay with sharing that, exploring that. And you know, what I do in my work as a counselor is help people through that. Like, that's what I do. So I'm okay with that. And I realized in that moment, it's like, I don't need to explore that more. I've done it. I could do it. I could do it again. But the sort of the benefit to myself in doing it again isn't necessarily there. But as I was doing the improv, as I was, going through all of the motions, and I really encourage everyone to do it. It's a great sort of experience exploring improv. But I realized that I am not vulnerable on the other side of things. I'm afraid to get silly. I'm also almost afraid to share my happiness, share my joy, share my processes, share my wins. That's sort of why I started this podcast with that discussion of purpose. Other people were sharing their pains and their darkness, and, very quickly I had this realization, actually, I'm already there. I'm living my purpose. Wow. And I felt almost a little bit outcasted because people were sharing their pain. They were sharing their process, sharing their loss, sharing, all of the different things that were happening in their life. And half a year ago, 3 years ago, I would have been right there with them, sharing deeply. And I could have chosen to sort of slip into that role again, and it wouldn't have been bad. I would have, released a little bit more and all of this stuff. But I realized, checking into myself, no, like, I actually need to share the wins. I need to be positive. I need to open up. Because that scares me now. Sharing the wins, sharing the positivity, sharing the happiness, sharing the smile. There's a level of vulnerability on the upside that is hard to embrace, at least for me. And I know that there's a contrast there, because some people, they're more than happy to be in that space all of the time, but they can't go deep. They can't go dark. They can't share the depths of the shadow. Fair enough. Maybe they need the other side of the work, and that's there for them. But I guess, I came away from this experience going, multiple insights. But the main insight was, I'm living my purpose. I need to remind myself to continue to live my purpose. So I'll do that daily. I'll do the daily meditation. I'll remind myself of the sense of self. I'm doing the, December self-care challenge, staying sane this festive season. I'm doing those things. But I also need to be leaning into the positive, sharing the happiness, sharing the joy, sharing the upside. Because that needs to be explored and expressed too. That needs to be modeled. That is another aspect of the self. And it's like, I've gone deep. Let's go high as well, Just a simple thought there. And I guess I'm curious. I'm curious for you. Have you explored both sides? The shadow and the shimmer. The light and the dark. Someone highlighted something of the idea of finding the sense of self. I've been working with internal family systems, and it has this sort of sense of self, but you've got to sort of embrace the parts. And they realized that they were doing a bunch of weird sort of behaviors that weren't that great, but it's like, let's invite the dragon, the inner dragon, the shadow to the table. But let's also invite the phoenix. And I really liked that analogy, the shadow and the phoenix sitting next to you. It's a dichotomy, so it's not necessarily true, and there's different parts and all this sort of stuff. But I guess holding space for all aspects of the self, the light and the dark, the ups and the downs, the all of the aspects, sharing the losses, sharing the wins, being vulnerable in it all. There's some real beauty and joy and resonance there. So I'm sharing all of that, and I'm curious if you relate to it. Let me know. And I also want to give you an invite, if you feel the call to give yourself some self-care this festive season. And if you're hearing this a little bit later, that's okay. Join in. The idea being is to either add something to your December, a little bit of self-care daily, a little bit of meditation, exercise, a bath, a tea, nature walk, a fiction, music, whatever it is. Or perhaps let something go, saying no to the things that are no longer serving, doing what I'm doing, embracing some silence, whatever it is, turning the news off. Something that you can do this festive season to help stay sane. And the reason I say this is that, life is still happening, but there's more stuff to do. More things to attend, more gatherings to arrive for, financial costs, all of these things. And rather than just surviving it, I want to thrive during it. So I'm giving myself the gift of silence, and I encourage you either to add something that would help, something small, or remove something that is costing you. If that sounds curious, click through the link in the show note, join me for and within the Art of Self-Connection community group. It is free. We've got a lot going on in there. And the final thing I want to say, if you like the idea of the men's work, the Island of Man, I will shoot a link in the show notes as well, so you can click through and check out what they've got going on. Either way, thanks for joining the episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Catch ya.